Hello, and welcome back. If you found your way here tonight, maybe it's because sleep hasn't been easy to find. Maybe something feels emptier than it did a few weeks ago. A chair no one sits in anymore. A voice you keep almost hearing. A name you catch yourself about to say out loud before you remember. You don't have to explain it to me. You don't have to explain it to anyone tonight. Grief doesn't usually arrive all at once and then leave. More often it settles in as an undertone, quiet most of the day, and then a little louder right around now, in the specific hush of a room at night when there's nothing left to distract you from it. If that's where you are tonight, you're not doing anything wrong by feeling it. You're just a person who loved something, or someone, enough that its absence still has weight. Just let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench. Wherever you're lying right now, let it hold all of your weight. You don't have to hold any of it yourself for the next little while. Tonight's story is an old one, but it isn't really about loss. Not only about loss. It's about what happens after the loss, when everything you thought you needed has been taken from you, and one person, just one, decides not to go. It's a story about staying. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breath slow down on its own. You don't need to do anything special with it. Just let it get a little longer, a little quieter, the way it does right before sleep finds you. I'll do the rest. Just listen. Picture, if you can, a dry and dusty road. Not a road with cars or noise, a road worn into the earth by feet, by centuries of feet, the kind of road that existed long before anyone thought to pave anything. It's late afternoon, the kind of gold light that comes right before evening, when every shadow gets long and soft at the edges. There's a wind moving low across the hills, not strong, just enough to stir the dry grass at the roadside, enough to lift a little dust that catches the light like something almost holy. Somewhere further off, if you listen closely enough in your mind, there might be the small sound of a bell, a goat or a sheep, somewhere out of sight, marking that some kind of ordinary life continues, unbothered, alongside whatever grief moves through this story. And on that road right now, there are two women walking. Neither of them young enough anymore to walk without feeling it in her knees. Neither of them with anyone left to walk beside them, except each other. Let's go back, though. Let's go back to how they got here, to this particular road, on this particular evening, and to the choice that brought them both to this same stretch of dust under this same darkening sky. Long before the road, there was a house in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, the name means house of bread, which is almost cruel, because when this story begins, there was no bread in it at all. Try to picture it. Fields that should have been green with new grain, standing brown and cracked instead. Wells drawn low. Neighbors rationing what little was left in their stores, watching each other a little too carefully at the market, the way people do when there isn't enough to go around. Bethlehem, the house of bread, had become a house of quiet, gnawing worry instead. The kind that doesn't shout, but never quite lets you sleep either. A famine had settled over the land, the kind that doesn't announce itself all at once, but tightens slowly, month by month, until a family has to make a choice it never wanted to make. And so a man named Elimelech gathered his wife, Naomi, and their two sons, and they left the house of bread that had no bread, and walked east toward Moab, a foreign country, a foreign people, a foreign God. It must have felt like giving something up just to survive. It usually does. Leaving never feels like the safe choice in the moment, even when it plainly is one. I imagine there were neighbors in Bethlehem who thought Elimelech was overreacting, who stayed and weathered the famine and never quite forgave the family that left. There often are. Leaving to survive doesn't always look brave from the outside. Sometimes it just looks like giving up on a place too soon. In Moab, there was grain. There was enough. The family settled, the way people do when a temporary decision starts to look permanent. The two sons grew into men, and in time each of them married, Moabite women, women from that foreign land Naomi had never wanted to call home. One was named Orpah, the other was named Ruth. I imagine there were ordinary evenings in that house that none of them thought to treasure at the time, because who treasures an ordinary evening while it's happening? Naomi teaching her daughters-in-law how she liked her bread kneaded, even though it wasn't the bread of her own mother's house. Ruth, maybe, laughing at some unfamiliar custom of her husband's family, or teaching them a song from her own childhood in return. Elimelech's voice somewhere in the yard, in that low way a household absorbs a father's presence without really noticing it, the way you don't notice a wall is holding up a roof until it isn't there anymore. None of them knew, in those years, how much they'd give to have one more of those unremarkable evenings back. For a while, we don't know exactly how long, but the story tells us it was closer to 10 years than to 1. For a while, it must have almost felt like an ordinary life. Meals together, small jokes, the particular comfort of a house that has more than one generation living under its roof. And then, the way it so often happens, the losses came one after another, with barely room to breathe between them. First, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. We aren't told how, only that he did, and that Naomi was a widow now, in a country that was not her own. In that place, in that time, a widow without sons was about as vulnerable as a person could be. No land of her own by right, no clear place in a household, dependent on the mercy of whatever family might still claim her. Naomi understood this better than anyone. She had already buried a husband once. She knew exactly what kind of silence follows a woman home from a burial, and how long that silence tends to stay. You would think that would be the worst of it. It wasn't. Years later, after the sons had grown into husbands themselves, after there had been time enough to almost heal, both of them died too. Mahlon, Chilion, one after the other, or nearly so. The story doesn't linger on it, and maybe that's its own kind of mercy. Naomi was left with no husband, no sons, and 2 daughters-in-law who owed her nothing technically. Ruth and Orpah could have gone back to their own families the moment the funerals ended. There was no law, no shame in doing that. Naomi herself expected them to. Word reached her eventually that the famine back home had ended, that there was bread again in the house of bread. And something in her, some old instinct toward the place she'd come from, decided it was time to go back. Not toward anything good particularly, just back. Because when you have lost everything else, sometimes the only direction left is the one that leads to familiar ground, even if that ground holds its own grief. She set out, and Ruth and Orpah walked with her, at least as far as the edge of the road that would take them out of Moab for good. It was there that Naomi stopped walking. She turned to the 2 younger women she loved, we have to assume, even if the story never says the word directly. 10 years is enough time to love someone, and she told them to go back. Go back to your mother's houses, she said. May you find rest again, each of you, in the house of another husband. I have nothing left to give either of you. I am too old to start over, and even if I weren't, I have no more sons to offer you, and you are not obligated to wait for men who don't exist. It was a kindness, the way she said it. A releasing, not a rejection. The 3 women wept together, right there at the edge of the road, the kind of weeping that comes when everyone involved is losing something, even the person doing the letting go. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law's cheek one last time, and after a long moment, after every reasonable argument had been made, she turned and walked back the way they'd come, back toward her own people, her own gods, her own chance at a life that wasn't shaped entirely by grief. No one in this story blames her for that. I don't either. It was the sensible thing, maybe even the healthy thing. But Ruth didn't move. Naomi tried again. Look, she said, gesturing to the road Orpah had already disappeared down. "Your sister has gone back to her people and to her gods. Go with her." And Ruth, this is the part of the story people have retold for thousands of years, and I think it's because there's something in it that still reaches us, even now. Ruth knelt down in the dust of that road, and she would not rise. "Do not ask me to leave you," she said, and her voice, we're told, was steady even though the moment wasn't. "Do not ask me to turn back from following you. Wherever you walk, these feet will walk. Wherever you lie down for the night, I will lie down beside you. Your people have already become my people. Your God, the one I don't fully understand yet, the one who has taken so much from both of us, has already become the God I kneel to. Nothing but death will pull me away from your side. And even then, let me be buried close enough that the same ground covers us both." I don't think Ruth planned that speech. I think grief and love, pressed together hard enough, sometimes produce exactly the right words without any rehearsal at all. Naomi didn't argue after that. What do you say to a love that has already made up its mind? So the two of them walked on, together now, the rest of the way to Bethlehem. That's the road we started with. Remember the gold light, the dust catching it, the wind low across the hills. That's this road. This is where we are. The road from Moab to Bethlehem isn't a short one. It crosses dry hill country, and lower down, a river valley, the Jordan, wide and slow-moving at that time of year, that they would have had to cross on foot, holding whatever belongings they carried up out of the current. I think about the physical truth of that walk more than I used to. Two women, no man to carry anything for them, no escort, nothing but whatever they could balance on their own backs and shoulders. The blisters that must have formed and broken and hardened into something else by the third day. The particular ache of a hip that has walked further in a week than it has in a year. They would have slept wherever the light ran out, sometimes near other travelers for safety, sometimes alone, under nothing but the sky, which, out in that open country, must have been enormous and close at once, more stars visible than either of them could name. I like to imagine one particular night, though nothing in the old text tells us this happened exactly this way. I like to imagine a night when they'd stopped early because Naomi's feet had finally given out, and they sat together over whatever meal they had left, bread gone hard, water going warm in its skin. And I like to imagine that somewhere in that silence, Ruth began, quietly, to hum something. A tune from her own childhood, something her mother might have sung to her once, back before any of this, back before Moab meant anything but home. Naomi, I imagine, didn't ask her to stop. Grief has a strange relationship with beauty. Sometimes beauty feels like an intrusion, like the world has no right to still be lovely while you're breaking. But sometimes, if it comes gently enough, in a hum instead of a shout, in a foreign lullaby carried across a fire at the edge of nowhere, it slips in underneath the grief instead of fighting it. Not comfort exactly, just a small crack of something softer, letting a little light through. There must have been harder nights too. Nights when Naomi, lying awake, turned over every fear she hadn't said out loud yet. What would Bethlehem think of a Moabite daughter-in-law? Her people and Israel had a long, complicated history, not always a kind one. Would the women who'd once been her friends even receive Ruth at all? Would this whole journey turn out to be one more loss, dressed up as a homecoming? She never voiced these fears to Ruth, as far as the story tells us. Maybe she didn't want to hand her own dread to someone who had already given up so much. There's a particular kind of fear that lives in the last stretch of any long journey, when the destination stops being an abstract idea and starts being a real place you'll have to actually walk into. I imagine Naomi felt that fear grow heavier with every hill they crossed, every hour that put them closer to Bethlehem, closer to faces that would recognize her, Closer to the moment, she'd have to explain, over and over, everything that had happened since she'd left. Ruth couldn't carry that particular fear for her. She had her own version of it, a foreign woman walking into a town that might never fully accept her, no matter how loyal she'd been. But she could, and did, keep walking alongside it. Sometimes the kindest thing one person can do for another isn't to remove the fear. It's simply to keep walking close enough that the person carrying it never has to carry it entirely alone. But morning after morning they got up and packed what little they had and kept walking. That's most of what steadfastness actually looks like in practice. Not one dramatic vow, repeated once and never tested again, but 100 small mornings of getting up anyway and choosing the same road all over again. When they finally reached Bethlehem, the whole town noticed. Word moves quickly in a small place, and people came out to see. "Is this Naomi?" they asked each other, because 10 years and a great deal of grief can change a face. "Don't call me Naomi anymore," she told them. Naomi, which means pleasant. "Call me Mara instead, which means bitter. I went away full," she said, "and the Lord has brought me back empty." I wonder if some of the women who'd once been her friends flinched, hearing her ask to be called something so heavy. Grief makes people uncomfortable, even people who love us, because it reminds them how little control any of us really have. Some of them probably didn't know what to say back to her. Some of them probably found a reason to change the subject quickly. That happens too, when someone is honest about their pain. Not everyone knows how to sit inside it with you. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I don't think we should rush past it. Naomi wasn't wrong to feel that way. Grief doesn't ask permission before it reshapes how we see ourselves. Sometimes the most honest thing a person can say is, "I don't feel like myself anymore. Call me something else. I'm not who I was." But here's what I notice every time I come back to this story. Naomi said she came back empty. She didn't come back alone. Those first days back must have been strange ones. The particular strangeness of returning somewhere familiar as a completely different person than the one who left. Old neighbors would have offered the kind of help people offer when they don't quite know what else to do. A loaf of bread here, an old blanket there, kindness mixed with a certain careful distance, the way people sometimes hold themselves back from grief that looks too large to fully enter. Naomi and Ruth had, as far as we're told, no fixed home of their own yet in that town, no income, no clear plan beyond simply having arrived. It would have been easy, in those first weeks, to feel like the return had solved nothing at all, like they'd only traded one kind of emptiness for another, familiar version of it. They arrived in Bethlehem right at the start of the barley harvest, which the story mentions almost in passing, but which matters more than it seems to. Because Ruth, still a foreigner in this new place, still without a husband or income or standing, did what a woman in her position could do. She asked Naomi's permission to go out into the fields and gather whatever grain the harvesters left behind. It was allowed, under the law of that land, a kind of built-in mercy for widows and the poor, that they could follow behind the reapers and take what was dropped or left at the edges. So she went, not knowing whose field she'd wander into, not knowing that this ordinary, exhausting, humbling work, bending again and again under a hot sun to gather someone else's leftover grain, was about to change everything. The work itself was nothing glamorous. Bending low, again and again, under a sun that didn't ease up just because a person was grieving. Fingers working through stalks the harvesters had already passed over, gathering what little they'd missed or dropped. A foreign woman, unfamiliar to everyone around her, doing the kind of labor reserved for people with no other option left. Her back would have ached by midday. Her hands would have been raw within a day or two, because this wasn't a single lucky afternoon. It was becoming her daily labor, day after day, the only way she knew to keep herself and Naomi fed. As it happened, though nothing in this story is really as it happened, not by accident. The field belonged to a man named Boaz. A relative, as it turned out, of Naomi's late husband, a man of some standing in the town, and by every account, a decent one. The kind of man, from what we're told, who greeted his own field workers each morning with an actual blessing instead of just orders, who paid attention to who was thirsty and who was tired, long before Ruth ever arrived to glean at the edges of his crop. Kindness, in other words, wasn't a performance he was about to put on for a stranger's benefit. It was simply how he already moved through the world, and Ruth happened to wander into the path of it. Boaz came out to check on his harvest that day, the way landowners did, and he noticed her, a woman he didn't recognize, working harder and more carefully than she needed to. He asked his foreman who she was. "She's the Moabite," the foreman said, "who came back with Naomi. She asked if she could gather behind the harvesters, and she's been at it since morning without much rest." Something in that answer must have stayed with Boaz, because instead of simply nodding and moving on, he walked over to her himself. "Listen, my daughter," he said, gently, we're told, not the way a stranger usually speaks to another stranger. "Don't go glean in anyone else's field. Stay close to my young women here. I've told the men not to bother you, and when you're thirsty, go and drink from what's already been drawn for them." Ruth bowed low, overwhelmed, and asked him, a foreigner, a nobody by any measure that mattered in that town, why he was showing her this kind of favor. "I've heard everything," Boaz told her. "Everything you did for your mother-in-law after your husband died. How you left your own father and mother, and the land you were born in, to come to a people you had never known before. May the Lord repay what you've done. May you find shelter under the wings of the God you've come to trust, even though none of this was easy." He gave her more that day than she'd asked for. Extra grain, deliberately dropped for her to find. A place at the meal when the workers sat to eat. Water whenever she needed it, without having to ask. Ruth carried home that evening far more barley than a morning of ordinary gleaning should have produced. And when Naomi asked whose field it had been, and heard the name Boaz, something shifted in her voice, something that hadn't been there since before the road, since before Mara. "He is one of our close relatives," she said, "one of our family's redeemers." It's a small thing on the surface, a woman recognizing a name. But grief has a way of flattening a person's voice for a long time, and then, some ordinary evening, without warning, a single word lands differently, and something in the chest lifts just slightly, before the mind has even caught up to explain why. The harvest went on for weeks, barley giving way to wheat, and the whole time Ruth kept gleaning in Boaz's field, kept coming home with more than she should have, kept noticing, I imagine, the particular kindness in how he made sure she was never once made to feel like a burden. Naomi, watching all this unfold, began to see something more than gratitude was possible here. One evening, she sat Ruth down and told her what she'd been turning over in her mind. Boaz was close kin enough that, under the old customs of their people, he could act as what was called a kinsman redeemer, someone with both the right and the responsibility to restore what a family had lost when its men died without heirs. It wasn't only about land, though land was part of it. It was about a whole family line quietly ending, forgotten, unless someone stepped in and chose to carry it forward. "Tonight," Naomi told her, "he'll be at the threshing floor, finishing the winnowing, and after he eats and settles down to sleep near the grain, to guard it through the night. Go to him, wait until he's asleep, then uncover his feet and lie down there, and when he wakes, he will tell you what to do." It was a strange instruction by any modern measure, but in that place, in that time, it was a known custom, a way of formally, humbly asking a kinsman to extend the protection of his name over a widow left with nothing. Not a trick, not a trap, a request, made in the most vulnerable posture a woman in her position could offer. It would have taken a particular kind of courage to walk down to that threshing floor in the dark. Ruth had already left one country, one set of gods, one entire identity to follow Naomi here. This was one more leap, and maybe the most exposed one yet, because this time there was no guarantee at all of how it would be received. She did it anyway. In the middle of the night, Boaz startled awake to find someone lying at his feet. "Who is there?" he asked, and when Ruth told him her name and made her request, plainly and without shame, asking him to spread the corner of his covering over her, the old symbol of a man taking a woman under his protection, he didn't recoil from it. He didn't treat it as scandal. "Blessed are you," he told her, "for this kindness is greater than the first. You didn't run after younger men, rich or poor. Don't be afraid. I will do everything you're asking. Everyone in this town already knows you're a woman of noble character." There was one complication. A nearer relative existed, someone with a prior right to redeem the family before Boaz could. So Boaz, careful even in his eagerness, sent her home before light, before anyone could see her and misunderstand what had happened, with as much grain as she could carry, and a promise. He would settle the matter properly, in public, the very next day. And he did. At the town gate, in front of the elders, in front of witnesses, he laid the matter out plainly to the nearer kinsman, who, after weighing the cost to his own estate, chose to step aside. There was an old custom for making that choice official, removing a sandal and handing it over, a small, strange, physical seal on a decision that would otherwise have lived only in words. And so, in front of the whole town, at the gate where every important thing in that community was decided, Boaz declared it settled. He would redeem the land. He would take Ruth as his wife. The family that had walked out of Bethlehem empty, that had lost every man who once carried its name, would not simply vanish after all. He married her. The town blessed the marriage. The elders at the gate spoke over her the way people speak over a woman they hope will build something lasting. And in time, Ruth and Boaz had a son. They named him Obed. The women of Bethlehem came to Naomi when the child was born. The same women, perhaps, who had once looked at her and asked uncertainly, "Is this Naomi?" And this time they said something different. "Blessed be the Lord," they told her, "who has not left you without a redeemer today. This child will renew your life. He will sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is worth more to you than 7 sons, has given him to you." I imagine the whole street must have smelled of the recent harvest that year. Grain dust still settling in the corners of doorways. The particular gold light of early autumn on the stone walls. And in the middle of all that ordinary town noise, this one small, extraordinary thing. A woman once called bitter, surrounded by neighbors who had watched her whole unraveling, now holding a baby against her chest, while those same neighbors sang out something that sounded almost like an apology and a celebration at once. They placed the baby in Naomi's arms. The woman who once asked to be called bitter held new life against her chest, and the neighbor women, watching, gave the child a name of their own. They called him a son born to Naomi. It's worth pausing on this, too. Ruth never stopped being a foreigner in that town, not officially, not by blood. And yet, by the end of this story, she's remembered not as an outsider tolerated out of kindness, but as family, fully, permanently. The kind of family a whole town, and eventually a whole nation, would trace its history back through. Loyalty like hers has a way of erasing the very category of outsider it started in. That's most of the story. There's more after it if you follow the thread far enough. This child, Obed, became the grandfather of a shepherd boy named David, who would one day be king. But I don't think that's really the point tonight. The point, I think, is smaller than a kingdom, and somehow bigger. A woman lost everything. A husband, 2 sons, a home, a name she recognized in the mirror. And in the middle of all that losing, one other woman, who owed her nothing, who had every reasonable excuse to walk away, knelt down in the dust of a road and refused to leave. She did not go back. She stayed. I don't know exactly what you've lost. I don't know if it's a person or a version of your life you thought you'd have by now, or a sense of who you are that slipped away somewhere in the last few months without your permission. But I'd guess that if you're here, listening to this, some part of you understands what it feels like to stand at the edge of a road and watch someone or something walk away. Maybe you're the one who has been left. Maybe some nights you feel a little like Naomi did, wondering if you should ask people to call you something else now because you don't quite recognize the person this grief has made of you. If that's true tonight, I want you to hear this part clearly. It is allowed to feel bitter. It's allowed to feel empty. Naomi did, and nobody in this story rushes her out of it. Grief is not a problem to be solved quickly. It's a weight to be carried, for as long as it takes, by people who are patient enough to keep carrying it alongside you. Which is the other half of this story. The half I don't want you to miss because it's so easy to focus on Naomi's loss and forget Ruth's staying. Somewhere in your life, right now, even on a night that feels this alone, there is very likely someone who has already made the same kind of quiet decision Ruth made. Someone who isn't going anywhere. A friend who keeps checking on you even when you don't answer right away. A sibling, a parent, an old companion who has outlasted every reasonable excuse to give up on you. Maybe you haven't noticed them lately because grief has a way of narrowing your eyes until all you can see is the empty chair. But look a little wider when you're ready. There's likely a Ruth in your life too, somewhere. Someone who has already decided, wherever you go, I go. Wherever you rest tonight, I will not be far. And maybe you're not only the one who has been left tonight. Maybe you're also someone trying to be a Ruth for somebody else right now. And some days it feels impossibly heavy. If that's you, I want to say this gently. Staying doesn't mean you'll never feel tired of it. Ruth's vow on that road was real, but it didn't erase every hard mile that came after. It just meant she kept choosing the same road each morning, even on the days it would have been easier not to. If you're weary from staying beside someone else's grief right now, that weariness doesn't undo your love. It's often the clearest evidence of it. I think it's worth saying, too, that Ruth's loyalty didn't mostly look like grand declarations after that first day on the road. Mostly, it looked like gleaning. Bent over, day after day, in a hot field, doing unglamorous, repetitive, exhausting work that nobody would have written a story about on its own. Most love, the kind that actually holds people together through loss, looks a lot more like that than like a single dramatic vow. It looks like showing up again tomorrow, sending the same small message you sent yesterday, sitting through another quiet evening with someone who still doesn't feel much like talking. If your version of staying feels small and unremarkable lately, more like a field than a threshing floor, that doesn't mean it matters less. It might be exactly the kind of loyalty this story is actually about. Maybe, tonight, you need someone else's words because you don't have your own left. If so, borrow Ruth's, however loosely. Wherever this grief takes you, I will not leave. Wherever this night takes you, I will stay close enough to reach. You can say that to someone you love. You can, if it helps, even say some version of it to the frightened, tired part of yourself that wonders if it can survive what's been lost. I will stay. I will not abandon this version of myself just because she is grieving. That, too, is a kind of loyalty worth practicing. There's something almost unbearably tender to me in the image of Naomi holding that baby at the end of this story. Not her own child, not even, strictly, Ruth's alone. A shared child, born out of two women's losses and one woman's refusal to walk away. Restoration, it turns out, rarely looks like getting back exactly what was taken. It usually looks like something new, built slowly, out of whatever was left, by people who refuse to disappear from each other's lives. And if for now it feels like there's no one, if the road feels as empty as it did for Naomi at the edge of Moab, I want to gently remind you of something this story keeps circling back to, quietly, underneath everything else. The God that Ruth chose to kneel to, the one she called her own in that moment on the road, is the same one who is already at work in the empty fields, guiding a foreign widow's feet toward exactly the field she needed to be standing in. Nothing in this story is really an accident. Not the famine, not the fields, not the timing of a harvest that happened to be starting the week two grieving women walked into town with nothing. You are not walking an accidental road either, even on the nights it feels like it. So tonight, however much you've lost, let yourself rest in this instead. That staying is possible. That love like Ruth's still exists, still shows up, still kneels down in the dust beside people who feel like they have nothing left to offer in return. And that even empty hands, in time, can hold something new again. It's time to let this one go now, and let sleep take the rest. You made it through the whole of it tonight, the losing and the staying both. And that's no small thing to carry right before sleep. Whatever tomorrow asks of you, it can wait until morning. Wherever you are tonight, whatever road brought you here, may you be held the way Naomi was held. May you find, even in the smallest ways, someone willing to kneel down beside you and stay. She did not go back. She stayed. Rest now. I'll be here again next time with another story, whenever you need one. Good night.